Hey there, hope you can hear me. Hope you can see me. Let me know.
Here, the red button will go on and you speak, okay? Because otherwise they won't hear you.
Hey, can you hear me? Hello.
Hi, Mr. Lepovsky, this is Linda. Can you hear
Hey,
me?
Linda, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. And is my camera on me and everything?
Not yet, because we haven't started the meeting. The meeting will start in about 5 minutes. Our chair, Councillor Rachel Spagnola, will call the meeting to order in about 5 minutes. And at
Right.
that point, our IT will put you on the screen. If there's a problem,
Okay.
you can always communicate with Rosa,
Okay.
and but we should be okay. Thank,
Okay, very good.
yeah,
Thanks.
thanks for joining us today. We appreciate you.
Happy to do it.
Good afternoon. I will call the meeting to order, and I will start today's meeting with a land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge that the ground on which we live is the traditional territory of Caldwell First Nation, of the Three Fires Confederacy, and the original people of Point Pelee and Pelee Island and its surrounding lands and waters, and that of the Huron-Wendat and Wyandot peoples. We recognize and respect the First Nations who are stewards of the land and waters of Turtle Island and who have embraced this stewardship since time immemorial. We would also like to acknowledge the contributions of other nearby First Nation communities and all the original peoples across Turtle Island. Okay, next is disclosures of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Is there any? I can't see on Zoom. I'm assuming no. Adoption of minutes. Okay, and I have Jason and Councillor Burns. Thank you. Item D, items for consideration. The verbal update on request for a second accessibility flag. Rosa?
Hello, committee members. I just wanted to provide an update to the committee regarding Councillor Burns's request for a second regional accessibility flag, and I would like to let everyone know that we did acquire that second flag.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Rosa. Is there any questions or comments? No? Okay. So the recommendation that the verbal report of the council coordinator regarding the request for a second regional accessible flag be received, and which we did, so thank you. Number 2, questions and answer session with special guest, Mr. David Lepofsky. So thank you for being here today, Mr. Lepofsky. And I will pass.
Hi there. I want to make sure you can all hear me.
Yes, we can. Yes, we
great.
can.
And how long do we have a time set for how long we'll talk, or how's this? How would you like to proceed?
Sorry, Mr. Lepofsky, can you repeat that, please?
Oh, sure. I just want to know how much time the committee had allocated, so I know how to use our time the most efficiently.
We have, the meeting is scheduled for about an hour. We have some items after your discussion. So if you have some presentation or something you want to speak on, please feel free to do so. We do have some questions. We had the committee review the YouTube video, and some of our members have given us some questions for you after you're done speaking.
Okay. I'm just going to talk about this because I'm really eager to take your questions and get a conversation going. First and foremost, I want to thank you all for inviting me to speak to you, and I want to thank you for serving on the Accessibility Advisory Committee. We need these committees to be a voice for progress on accessibility at the local level, and we depend on people being willing to volunteer their time to do that. So a huge thank you. Let me offer you a couple of resources right off the top. If you want to know kind of what's happening at the cutting edge of advocacy for accessibility, which is after all what you're there for, I invite you to sign up to get email updates from us, the AODA Alliance. We are nonprofit, we are nonpartisan, we are not incorporated. We will never ask you for money. We don't want money. If you send it to us, we'll send it back. So we will not pester you about money, but we will keep you posted on what's going on. And people find that both our website, which is, I'm going to give you in a minute, and our updates provide you with, outside the government, what we aspire to be a useful, helpful, authoritative source of information. If you want to sign up, you can do it right now. If you got a computer or a smartphone, you just go to our website, which I'll give you in a minute, and right on the homepage, there's a sign up link. You just plug in your email, and there you go. It's www.aodaalliance.org, aodaalliance.org. And we try to keep you posted. I write those updates, and if you ever have a question, you just hit reply. It comes right to me. And we're not one of those annoying listservs where you suddenly hear from people feeding back and you get jammed with email back and forth. You'll just get stuff from us. And we welcome your feedback when we're putting forward proposals. If there's things we're raising that you think are good, let us know, or you don't agree, let us know. The other thing I want to tell you is this. I aim, and the AODA Alliance aim to be straight shooters on whatever we do. When governments are doing things that are good, we say, hey, that's great, do more. And when governments are not doing things that are good or doing things that are a problem, it's our obligation to point that out and to make constructive suggestions. And in that spirit, I just want to take a minute to give what unfortunately is troubling news. I was involved, as were the predecessor to the AODA Alliance. We led the fight from 1994 to 2005 to get the AODA passed. And we were pretty excited 18 years ago when the legislature not only passed it, but did so unanimously. And when they did so, they committed Ontario to become fully accessible. And they set a deadline, which was 2025. But at the time, there were people in the disability community who said, hey, Lepofsky, that's 20 years. We can't wait that long. And our response collectively was, look, it's a long time, but if that's the time that's needed, let's live with it. And we did. The problem is that government after government have been dragging their feet on implementing it. So that if you're a municipality or you're a private business or you're a school board and you want to know, like, okay, what do we have to do? The problem is there are some regulations or accessibility standards that have been made under the AODA, and they're helpful to a point. But even if you comply with all of them, they don't tell you all you need to do, and they will not assure that you will become accessible. And organizations that are actually, trying to comply with them, at the same time, will be creating new accessibility barriers and leaving old ones in place. Now, from your point of view, that's enormously frustrating. And it's even more frustrating when we now know, beyond any doubt, that a year and 3 months or 4 months from now, when January 1st, 2025 arrives, the 20 years will be up that some people were worried was too long. And this province will not be accessible, not even close. Yes, there's been progress, and it's good that there's been progress, but things aren't moving the way they should. And we don't support or oppose any party. We try to get commitments from every political party, and we try to work with anybody who, by offering constructive ideas. I will tell you that it is a source of significant frustration that the current government at Queen's Park has been more unwilling to engage with us than any government in the past 20 years. The accessibility minister does not answer our emails. His office staff do not answer our outreach or request to communicate. The Premier's office doesn't talk to us. The Premier's never met us. And this is, beforehand, I will tell you that for many years, we met with minister after minister. In fact, the current minister for accessibility, I've met with and dealt with his office quite extensively up till a couple of years ago. And all of a sudden, it's like the door slammed. And I'm frustrated. We're all frustrated, but we're not giving up. So you'll still find that we are offering constructive ideas, but we welcome what we now know is that in the absence of the action that we need from Queen's Park, local municipalities are in a very important position to show leadership on accessibility. Now, it's not the most efficient way to do things. It would make a lot more sense if we had a province that created the mandatory accessibility standards so that each municipality doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. That's why the AODA was passed. That's why we fought for it. But they're not. And there's not been a new accessibility standard enacted. The last time one was enacted, a new one was enacted, was in 2012. That's 11 years ago. The last time an existing one was revised, the only time one was revised, was in 2016. That's 7 years ago. We're not giving up. We're going to keep up the pressure. We'd love to, and I welcome your questions of what can be done to help. And I hope, please give me feedback. I thank you if you've had the time to watch that video. We produced that video because we hoped it would be a useful tool. We get feedback from members of accessibility advisory committees and special education advisory committees from time to time, and we get the same questions. We figured, let's put together a package to offer some tips and advice so that you can all use it. And if others are on your committee who haven't had a chance to see it, please encourage them to watch. With that, over to you. I welcome questions, comments, feedback, support, criticism, whatever you got. Let her rip.
Hi, Mr. Lepofsky. Thank you so much for that introduction.
By the way, please call me David. I'm a really informal guy.
Thanks, Dave. We appreciate you making it here today, and I have a set of 6 questions here that we would love to ask you. I have some great feedback from the committee. So number 1, after watching the video, the question I have is in regard to the schools. With the legislation saying that come 2025, everything needs to be accessible in the schools, whose responsibility is it to make sure that this occurs?
Okay, here's how this works. The fact is, even if there was no AODA, there has been a requirement in our law to prevent new barriers, to remove existing barriers. And it applies to universities and colleges and the provincial government and school boards and municipalities. It is not new. It was not created by the AODA. It is required for government and the public sector by the Charter of Rights. Section 15, the equality section, guarantees the equal protection and equal benefit of the law, which includes all programs, without discrimination because of disability. It's also required by the Ontario Human Rights Code, which prohibits discrimination because of disability and imposes a duty to accommodate people with disabilities up to the point of undue hardship. Those laws weren't passed in 2005. The charter was passed in 1982, and the equality provision went into effect in April of 1985. So that's like coming up, it's about 37 years ago. The Human Rights Code was amended to include disability in 1982. So that was 41 years ago. These are not new. And in fact, I encourage you to view with caution. Over the years, sometimes, for example, the AMO, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, has complained that the AODA imposes new mandates and they're unfunded mandates and so on. It's all, unfortunately, inaccurate. There's been a duty to do this, and it's been imposed for 40 years. So to the extent that the AODA came along, its aim was not to create new rights, but to implement the rights that we won 40 years ago in the Charter of Rights and the Human Rights Code. And we had to fight for those rights. They weren't just kind of handed to us. So the best way for me to answer it is by saying this duty is out there. And the Ontario Superior Court, in a case I argued, about 30 years ago, I can't remember, dealing with human rights, not disability, but just generally said, look, discrimination is everybody's business. So everybody's got to do their part. The provincial government should be doing their part, but even when they're not, school boards need to do their part and so on. So, for example, if a school is building a new school building, and the provincial government 3 years ago announced, I don't know, $500 million for new schools, and you'll see provincial politicians who want to be there when they open these new schools. The province is not doing a good job of requiring those new buildings to be properly accessible. But if they don't, then the school board can't just say the province isn't doing it, so we're not going to. The school board's got that obligation as well. Discrimination is everybody's business. Hope that helps. What's question 2? And by the way, I'm happy to take follow-up on any of this. Well, let's go through your 6 questions and then let's open it up.
Thank you. Would schools be required to reevaluate how their playgrounds are set up and ensure other areas in the schools are also accessible?
Okay, and by the way, I happen to be a lawyer, but I'm not giving legal advice here. Where to the extent that anybody, a school board or a municipality wants to get legal advice on this, they need to talk to their lawyers. I'm going to tell you what our position is as the AODA Alliance. Our position is that is what the Human Rights Code and the Charter requires. And the only defense to it is to say, oh, it's an undue hardship to make changes. And if there's an undue hardship because they're too costly to make this year, then they got to say, fine, we'll spread it over 2 years. And if they don't have the money to spread it over 2 years, then they got to make the case that it would be an undue hardship to spread it over 3 years. In other words, eventually it's got to get done. And the thing that's really important to understand about the Human Rights Code, and I can flip you a link. I'll do this right now. I'm going to put this in. You've had enough of videos from me, but I think this may help you. Just a second. Duty to accommodate video. DTA to. DTA to. Tell me if that chat message came through. A lot of people don't understand what the duty to accommodate under Human Rights Code and under the Charter of Rights means when it comes to people with disabilities. A lot of people with disabilities don't know. A lot of public administrators don't know. A lot of lawyers don't know. So what I did a couple of years ago was I recorded a video. It was actually a talk I gave at the Osgoode Hall Law School where I was then teaching, where I basically give an introduction to the duty to accommodate people with disabilities. And it's equally relevant to schools, to municipalities, to stores, and so on. I just sent you the link to it. Let me know if it came through. And I hope you find it helpful. It's about an hour. But I walk you through what it means, where it applies, who's got to do it, what are the defenses, what is undue hardship. But one point I'm going to tell you about right now is that if an organization is providing a service to the public, like a school board providing education, then they're obliged to comply with equality and human rights. And if they want to argue that it's impossible to accommodate people with disabilities in their playground or some facility or other because of the cost, the burden is on the school board to prove that it's impossible for them to have done any more than they did without undue hardship to the school board. And undue hardship varies. If it's a mom and pop store, it's a much lower standard. If it's the Toronto District School Board that's got a budget of $3.5 billion, it's a much bigger obligation. It's quite sensible, frankly. And what that means is there's a presumption in the Human Rights Code. They can't accommodate unless they can prove that it was impossible to do any more than they did. When it comes to things, the regulations under the AODA talk about accessibility requirements in a new playground, but a school board would have a lot of difficulty in my mind, establishing that it would be impossible to do anything more to make their existing playgrounds more accessible than they are. If there are big changes that cost a lot, you can say, okay, we'll put that off till we have the money or we have more money. But if there are smaller changes that could be done immediately, they'd have no argument at all. But evaluating any of these situations, people have to talk to their lawyers to figure out what their obligations are. I'm giving you some broad general principles, but the video I just sent you on the duty to accommodate will give you a really practical guide. I gave it as a talk at a law school, but I really meant it for people who aren't law students, who aren't lawyers, who don't know anything about this and want to know more of what they what can or should do. Back to you, question 3.
Thank you. And we did receive that video, and we will go ahead and circulate that video with the committee as well.
Great. By the way, I'm not on commission, honest. YouTube doesn't pay me for this. I genuinely do this to be helpful to people. Anyway, go ahead.
So, question number 3. My son has only been in school for a few years, but I can say that his school has really gone above and beyond to be accommodating to his needs and have made adaptations to allow his independence. If someone else finds that their school hasn't met the requirements come 2025, who would they address these concerns with within the school board or trustee, and what steps would they take?
All right. Fantastic question. And I'm going to send you another video. Believe it or not, believe it or not, in Ontario, we have 2 million students in our publicly funded schools, Catholic schools and public schools. Of them, 1 out of every 6 at least has a disability. That's over 300,000. And the problem is, but the good news is that our schools are staffed by teachers and principals and other staff who want to serve all kids. That's why they're there. The problem is the school system was designed too often on the premise that it's for students without disabilities, and students with disabilities become an afterthought and they run into barriers. That's why my coalition fought for years to get the government of Ontario to agree to develop a new regulation under the AODA called an Education Accessibility Standard, so that we didn't leave it to each of the 72 school boards to have to reinvent the accessibility wheel, not just for buildings, but for programs and for teacher training and all that kind of stuff, curriculum. And the good news is we got the government to agree to develop such a standard, and they appointed an advisory committee, which included equal representation from school boards, educators, and the disability community. And I had the privilege of serving on that committee. The government of Ontario actually appointed me to it. And we rendered a report, it'll be 2 years ago, this upcoming January, with a detailed roadmap on how to fix the system. It is the most comprehensive review of the school system in Ontario through the lens of the perspective of kids with disabilities and their parents in a generation or longer. That's the good news. The bad news is the Ontario government has done absolutely nothing to implement it, and we are advocating for them to do better. But it's still open to school boards right now to take our report, which is up on our website at aodaalliance.org/education. It's still open to school boards to take that report and say, we're not going to wait for the provincial government to show leadership. Let's go through this and see which of the things in that report we can do ourselves. May not be able to do everything, but let's see what we can do. And we're hoping they will, and we're eager to talk to the school boards about it. But in the meantime, and this is right on your question, we also produced a video, yes, another video, and it's because we've heard from so many parents of students with disabilities that they feel lost in the system. They don't know how to advocate for their child. They don't know who to go to. They don't know the answer to your question. This video is designed to do that. And we're actually asking school boards to share it with parents Doesn't cost anything. It's up on the internet. I am going to try, if I can, to just a second. Tips for parents video. All right, tell me if you got that. And I'm really delighted to tell you that in the case of each of these videos I'm now sending you, the one about the duty to accommodate, the one about parents, tips for parents on how to advocate for their kids, um, we've gotten a lot of good feedback, and they've been seen at least a couple of thousand times. One parent spoke to me and said, gee, about the parents' tips, I wish I'd known about this about 10 years ago. And I said, as a parent of a child with a disability myself, I wish I knew about this a few years ago. These are all lessons learned through the frustration of trying to take these things on your own. We're trying to make it easier for people. So if any of you, I know this is a municipal AAC, but if any of you are friends with any school trustees or school principals, send them this and tell them, send this out to all the kids, the parents in your school board, because it doesn't cost anything. It's free. And there's some useful, we hope, useful advice in it. Back to you. Question 4.
Thank you. So we have seen improvements to the built environment in public sector facilities since the establishment of the AODA, with accessible washrooms, automatic door openers, and accessible service counters becoming far more common. How are municipalities doing on other accessibility issues that are non-built environments, such as communication, processes, and access? And what are the areas that need to be most improved for municipalities?
Well, I'll give you a couple. First, I'm going to tell you the feedback of the last 2 AODA independent reviews. So part of what was, when the government brought in legislation that said, hey, you got 20 years to fix it, to get it all done, there was a worry, understandably, that human nature, people get busy, it won't get done. So we needed some checks and balances built into the law. And one of the checks that's built in is that every 3 or so years, the provincial government's required to appoint an independent person to go out and say, how are we doing? Are we on schedule? And if not, what do we need to change? And there have been 4 of these. 1 in 2010, 1 in 2014, 1 in 2019, and 1 this past spring. And the government is the body that's picking the judge. It's not a judge, but it's the person who's playing this role. Well, they've all said we're behind schedule and we need to do better, not just municipally, but more generally. And they, I'll give you the most significant examples. Almost 5 years ago this January, the late David Onley, our former lieutenant governor, rendered his report. And it was blistering. It said, there's been progress, but it's way too slow. And he described Ontario as a province full of soul-crushing barriers facing people with disabilities. And he said the progress on accessibility was glacial. Now, when David died, David and I were friends. When he died last December or January, there was a big outpouring in the media and a big state funeral celebrating his dedication to accessibility. But what there hasn't been is any effort by the provincial government to actually effectively implement his report. They appointed another fellow because they had to 3 years later to do the next report. His name is Rich Donovan. He rendered a report this past March. These are all on our website. If you go to aodaalliance.org, you'll see them on the What's New page. And if you sign up for our updates, you'd see them right when they come out because we announce them as fast as we can. Anyway, he also blasted the government for essentially not doing an effective job of implementing it. And the result is we got individual incidents of things being done well in some places and things not being done well in other places. And each municipality, each business left to sort of struggle on their own to figure out what to do because they're not getting the leadership. So let me give you one example municipally. And I don't know if this has hit your community. I hope to God not. But starting in the summer of 2020 or start of 2021, the provincial government decided to allow municipalities to do pilot projects with electric scooters. Those are not sit-down vehicles that a person with a disability sits in and uses as a mobility device. They're like the stand-up kick scooters that kids use, but they got a motor. And they can go at least 24 kilometers an hour, even faster, depending on which one, depending on what the driver wants. And as soon as we heard about this was a huge problem for people with disabilities because these are regularly in other cities. I don't know if you've seen them, but you go to cities where they're allowed and they are regularly ridden on sidewalks, even though they're supposed to be kept onto the roads. And so for people with disabilities, for members of the public generally, they're a danger of getting hurt. But for people with disabilities, they're a double danger. The first danger is getting hit. And they're silent, right? They're silent. So if you're blind, like I am, you won't know they're coming. If you're sighted and they come at you from behind, unless you got eyes in the back of your head, you won't know they're coming. But the second danger is that people, the rental companies that rent them, want you to just park them on the sidewalk, leave them lying around, and then somebody else will pick up. They make all the money, and we provide free parking, which is disturbing. And what's happened is some people leave them lying around and they become a tripping hazard for blind people. They become a barrier for people in mobility devices. And there is no strategy that's worked to prevent this. So what's happened in Ontario? It's been left to each municipality. Some aren't doing it. Ottawa has become a huge cheerleader for them and has allowed them year after year. And it's been a mess for people with disabilities. It's been a really big mess. And we've tried to advocate against it, but you know who we're up against is very well-funded corporate lobbyists for the electric scooter companies who clearly get an in with city staff in some communities. And they've been succeeding in Hamilton and in Mississauga and in Ottawa, as I mentioned, in Windsor. It's been a real problem. Now in Toronto, where I live, we organized and actually 2 years ago got our city council to vote unanimously to say no to e-scooters. But in fact, people are buying them and riding them all over the place, and there's no effective law enforcement. So what we need, and this is like Ontario, our municipalities already had enough barriers. This is making things worse. And so if I give it to you as an example, we need municipalities, for one thing, to say no to e-scooters, and for number two, to enforce the ban. People ride them in public, in places where they're illegal. They should be confiscated. There should be charges. If somebody was driving a car on a sidewalk, the police would not sit by. Somebody riding an e-scooter on the sidewalk should be the same thing. Back to you.
Thank you, David. What is one of the biggest breakthroughs or outcomes you have seen in a municipality or school board, excuse me?
That's a really good question. I have seen, and again, because we're volunteers, we haven't audited all over the place we don't have the capacity to go and check and sort of in that regard. But I will tell you that I have, as one illustration, I know that some school boards are doing a better job than others of providing families and parents with a way to try to just find out what to do with to meet the needs of their child with a disability and get some guidance to, or a system navigator to help them guide through it. Now, I suspect that is more in smaller boards. I can tell you the Toronto District School Board, which I'm very familiar with because I'm on their Special Education Advisory Committee and I've also got a child in the board. It is way too huge. And it's a problem. In terms of municipalities, I big credit to the city of Toronto for at least voting unanimously to say no to e-scooters. And it did so specifically because of disability issues. They were going to approve them. They were on track to approve them. And then our community went to city councilors, and there was a feeding frenzy. We have a lobbyist registry. We were able to document it. It's on our website. We have an e-scooters page. We were able to show how intense is the corporate lobbying. And despite that, we got the city council to pass a resolution that said, before we go any further, we want to know the impact on people with disabilities. And then when they got a report from city staff that said, there's a real big problem here, city council 2 years ago unanimously said no. Now, that is a huge credit to them. That the law isn't being enforced is a problem. That our new city council was looking at reopening this is a problem because the corporate lobbyists are still at work. But the other thing I want to give you is a credit, this specifically to Mayor John Tory at the time. You all know about the outdoor restaurant seatings that sprung up during COVID. And last winter, the city of Toronto announced, as I gather some municipalities have, that they're making it permanent. But they set a number of requirements for them tied to accessibility. And it's not everything we need, but credit to them for doing this. So that, for example, they're not supposed to block the sidewalk. If they're going to be, they can be on the road in areas where they get a permit, but they can't have a step down to them. They have to be built up so they're level with the sidewalk. So if you, for example, use a walker or a mobility device, a wheelchair, you're able to go from the sidewalk onto them. But on the other hand, people who want to walk by have safe clearance. These are actually really good steps. What we have called for, by the way, because your community shouldn't have to reinvent this wheel, is again for the province to pass a comprehensive provincial standard so that each municipality doesn't have to figure this out. But that is, I think, a really good illustration. The last thing I'm going to tell you is that there is an ongoing issue about accessible voting for people with disabilities. And I have a case before the Human Rights Tribunal against Elections Ontario on this, which is proceeding. And I don't want to go into that right now. But I will tell you that when it came to voting in the city of Toronto this past election, we had this by-election to replace the mayor when Mayor Tory stepped down. They had a helpline for people with disabilities. You can pick up the phone. You actually got through. Either you got right through to a human being, or you got through to a voicemail and they called back within a couple of hours, and they were really helpful. And it wasn't just some call taker who's reading you a script. It was. I thought it was quite impressive as a way to address issues, and it was quite helpful. I'm probably talking too long, and I don't want to use up all our time. So let's get to your next question.
Thank you. What has been one of the hardest barriers you have seen in your life or career or as an advocate for disabilities?
I'm not sure I can really answer that. I think the biggest barrier, the most troubling barrier, because you can't rank order them because you don't want to minimize one person's needs over another. But I have a recurring one, and that is seeing new barriers created using public money. Building new public transit stations that are not properly accessible. Our building code has accessibility requirements, but they're not adequate. You can build a building that is totally compliant with the building code, and the AODA includes almost nothing about the insides of buildings. You can comply with all of that, and yet you'll be creating new barriers. And it is infuriating that whether it's buildings or public transit or other things, that public money is time and again being used to create new barriers. So what I would invite your municipality to do is to adopt a policy that we do not want to use our public money to make things worse, to finance new barriers. If you start from that point, you're going to make some progress. All right, next question. I'm going to be shorter because I know we got people who are going to want to ask them live.
Thank you, David. I've been made aware that Michael does have a question as well.
Yeah. It was in the chat.
Yes, hello. So I have a question that's not specific to LaSalle. I also sit on other accessibility advisory committees. And a current issue we're dealing with is the municipality voting yearly to not have a substantial renovation at their town hall because it would trigger requirements for them to make very costly AODA improvements to the building. We've had allies in past councils, and we've had people who were devoutly against making any, financial changes to accommodate. And with any municipality, I find it's very difficult to establish that rapport with the council and with the mayor to get allies. So it sounds like you were able to do quite a number in Toronto and get everyone sort of on board with it. What are your strategies, recommendations to getting, political bodies involved in accessibility and the removal of barriers?
That's a great question. And I'm going to give you just a couple of sentences, but it's the kind of thing that sort of draws on a lifetime of experience. The first thing you need to do is to choose some things to advocate for where there's no argument against. So let's say you've got a building that requires some major changes in some areas. See if you can find some changes to start with that are not costly. And you remember that there's always stereotypes around cost. You say disability, you say building, and some people just immediately think, oh, it's too expensive. And that's a stereotype. But try to find that where there's ways to create solutions that are quick, cheap, and easy. I'll give you one that there's no answer to. How about if there's a public washroom, a men's room and a women's room, bathroom? How about putting up a Braille sign saying it's the men's room or the women's room? I think they cost about $5. And you don't want to spend the money? I could take out my Braille labeler right here and stick it up. It wouldn't cost anything. It'd be Dymo label tape. It'll look crappy, but we'll be able to read it. I actually my first law job, I worked for the provincial government in Ministry of the Attorney General. We were in a public, like in an office building, not a government building. They were renting office. And I asked, could they put Braille in the elevator buttons? And I got all sorts of runarounds. So one day I just came in with my, see if I can take it out here. It's one of these Dymo label makers, but it makes Braille label. So I just came in after hours and I stuck Braille numbers up on the buttons. Okay. And they didn't dare take them down. They looked like crap, but I could read them, but they didn't dare take them down until they put up proper ones. And what do you know? They put up proper ones. The government hasn't been in that building for years. It's now an office building, but I bet the Braille's still there. The second thing is you need to find natural allies. There'll be some people on council who will be on your side. There'll be some people who are not on your side, and there are some people who could become on your side. Aim for the people who you either are on your side or are neutral. And the next thing with the people who are neutral, find out either who's in their riding or who might be close to them. Everybody knows people with disabilities. We're one out of every almost 5 people in the country. So we're in everybody's families. We're in everybody's social circles. And it's often that interpersonal thing that can lead to it. A third thing I do, and you know, and if it's town hall, I would look at saying, let's have a day of find your way. Let's have city council vote to all come to city council meeting in wheelchairs one day, and invite them to try to come in and try to do it. And it would be great if you have TV there, but if you don't, everybody has or most people have a smartphone. They can record video. You can stream. You can make a record of it. There's a number of things, but I believe in, and you know, the last thing I'll say really quickly, when we came to convincing Toronto City Council to vote against e-scooters, it was a combination of working with different councillors, some of whom were already on our side and some who were on the fence, and talking to the mayor's office and making our case. So those are just some tips, but there's millions more I can think of. Next question. I hope this is helpful.
This is very helpful. Thank you, David. So these are all the questions that we have today for you.
Thank you, David, for attending today and sharing your knowledge and expertise. We really appreciate you being here. I am going to open it up to the committee to see if there is any other questions. Okay, Councillor Burns.
David, Terry Burns, have you lobbied AMO at all in your career, or municipalities themselves when you have an outstanding issue you believe should be a core thing that doesn't matter which government's there, should be done? In my 31 years, I have not seen any lobby, but over my period of time, I'd lost some elections, so there may have been some where I wasn't at the convention, but we just wrapped one up, and it certainly would be something that, you know, if you get municipalities to endorse these things first, major suggestion would be you would go to the County of Essex and have them distribute your recommendation to each of the municipalities in Essex County. We would then accept it, reject it, and then if we did, then we would expect the county to submit our submissions to the province to have it move forward. I don't know if you ever tried that strategy or not.
Well, I'll tell you, it's a great strategy. I'll tell you first, AMO has, I've not tried to reach out to them in years, because anytime we did try, they don't even answer us. I do, but before the AODA was passed, we organized for 10 years to get that law passed. We started, there was just 20 of us who met in a meeting room at Queen's Park in 1994. And we got started, and then we grew this movement. It was all volunteer. But one of the things that we did is we got local disability advocates to go to one municipality after another and got them to pass resolutions calling on the province to pass a Disabilities Act. And I can't remember, I think we got about 20 different municipalities to do it. So it's a strategy that we did, but it may be worth reaching back in and doing it again. I take your point, and it's a good point. It's a lot of work to organize that way, but frankly, when we did that 25 years ago, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have social media, we didn't have Twitter or whatever it's now called. So who knows?
Just a follow-up question.
Thank you, though, but I appreciate that. I really do.
Follow-up question is,
sure.
I think LaSalle does a pretty good job, and all our buildings are accessible to everyone. As far as I know, in this committee, if there's any areas that are not accessible, normally a committee will go out, review them, and then make recommendations.
Right.
But again, do you have a municipality that is outstanding that you can forward to our committee or anyone else, or we can view it on site? It's usually the little things that stop you, whether it's snow in the wintertime with a wheelchair, or parking close when it's raining for handicap accessible, you know, for people. But I'm just wondering if you have your number one municipality that does it
You know,
right?
it's such a good question, and the answer is no. And it's not because we're saying something bad about everybody, but as a volunteer group, we're not in a position, we don't have a capacity to do the kind of survey that you need to do. We can only go by kind of anecdotes. I mean, I can tell you that Ottawa City Council's response on e-scooters was really bad. I mean, it was, I mean, and to the point where some city councilors were at a committee meeting that I spoke at remotely, where they talked about how many complaints they were getting from members of the public about e-scooters and what a pain they are, and then they went and voted to continue them. So it's like, anyway, but that's episodic. I unfortunately, but you know, what might be an idea is, in fact, what would be really good. Can I give you an idea that I can recommend? Um, I encourage you folks to call on the provincial government to convene a conference of accessibility advisory committees. They did this. I spoke at it. I think it was about 12 years ago. It's been a long time. And the thing is, they did it back then when you had to pay to travel to Toronto or wherever. They could do it on as a virtual conference. But the answer to your question would be, it would be really interesting to get members of AAC speaking to each other, because they could then learn and compare notes over who's, you know, hey, we pitched this and they did it and it worked really well. And then you folks would be in a position to say, hey, if they did it in that town, why aren't we doing it here? Or the other way around. You're in a position to say, hey, we got all this fixed. But that might be an and if the province doesn't do it, and it wouldn't surprise me at Queen's Park these days, it's very hard to get them to do anything on accessibility. It's just not on their radar. I wish it was. But the other thing you might want to do is get together with a couple other AACs and say, why don't we organize our own? Let's do a 3-hour virtual conference. It's not, you don't have to worry about hotels and food and transportation, and set it up. And if we can help providing you some content, we'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other questions or comments for David?
I was just going to say it is really effective having that communication. I think we learned in Chatham-Kent about the on-demand transportation through another district that we reached out to that gave us their whole blueprint to it and advocated for that. So I think I agree there needs to be some sort of meeting space where we can share those ideas, because you have no idea how some of the other regions are tackling those accessibility concerns.
And if you think about it, like I know this from when I was chair of the Special Ed Advisory Committee. If I wanted to send an email like the video you just got to the chair of every AAC, there's no way to do it, right? I mean, there's no listserv. There's no person to send it to who will get it out. So there could be something, you folks could hit on a gold mine that would help other cities, and there's no way to share it around. Short of going online, and I've had volunteers do this, and try to find out who is the staff contact in every municipality. I mean, that's a huge amount of work. It's prohibitive. But you might want to, and if you don't want to start big, like, you know, you're a smaller community, you don't want to do something with all municipalities because that's hundreds. You might want to say, why don't we do a half day on a Saturday morning or something with just, say, Southwest Ontario or whatever part of the province you want to grab onto, and just do have a bit, and you could do either in person or breakout groups on Zoom. Anyway, back to you.
Okay, seeing no more questions or comments, again, thank you again, David, for being here today. We really appreciate your time.
Well, thanks so much for including me, and if I can help in the future, do let me know, and please share those videos around. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, we will now move on to item 3, verbal update on save the date for upcoming accessibility workshop, and I'll pass it over to Mrs. Jean.
So I received a communication from the county that they're going to be reviving the accessibility workshop they used to do pre-COVID. And what that entails is having speakers come in, some demonstrations, some booths and things like that with regards to accessibility, disabilities, barriers and things like that. It'll be held on October 19th, 2023 from 9 to 3. I don't have the location yet or the agenda, but once I get that, I will send that out to the committee. And Rosa, we can send a save the date after this meeting and updates to come as we get more information.
Thank you, Ms. Jean. Any comments or questions from anyone? Okay, we'll move on to number 4, the 2023 Strawberry Festival post-event update, and I will pass that on to Culture and Rec.
Thank you very much. I have a post-event report that's before you today. I've also brought up my colleague, Owen Stitchhaller, who is our Supervisor of Recreation within the Culture and Recreation Department and is our lead organizer for the Strawberry Festival. So certainly if there's any questions, either myself or most likely Owen will be able to help. Just quickly, back in April of this year, we would have brought forward a report prior to the event just to highlight some of the improvements we were trying to make based on feedback that we received from the prior meetings in the end of 2022 from the Accessibility Advisory Committee. This year's Strawberry Festival was very successful. We had just shy of 32,000 people attend, and that was just a little bit shy of the near 34,000 that attended back in 2022. So it was a very well attended event. We did offer the community living hour on Friday, which we had about 20 participants show up. And we also offered, again, as we've done in the past, a quieter, less congested atmosphere for the opening hour on the Sunday morning. And we had over 1,300 visitors come in that first hour on Sunday. We will certainly continue to offer those opportunities and look for ways to sort of push that information out more and more to encourage people that might want to take advantage of those opportunities. We also took the advice that came from our post-2022 event where we had some rubberized matting that covered electrical cords that ran across pedestrian aisleways at the festival. We invested some money to purchase more accessible cable cover units that made it less of a trip hazard, and with the black and yellow coloring and the hatching made it more visually able to, for people to more easily visually see those areas. And we also increased the width of aisleways just to improve the accessibility and the mobility. To my knowledge, and I'm not sure if Owen has anything different, but we didn't have any information brought to us about tripping or slipping like we did the previous year. So that was an improvement, and we appreciated the feedback that we received from the previous committee. We also this year added additional signage and tried to provide better wayfinding for people. Hopefully that was also well received. We didn't receive as many questions about how to find certain things across the festival, so that was an improvement. A new addition was also the rest area, quiet area tent that we established this year for the festival, again through suggestions about having a spot where a family could go and maybe they had a person with them that just needed a break from all the various noise and activity that was going on, or maybe it was a mother with young children that needed to go and have a place to take a break as well. Throughout the festival, the tent was well received. We do intend to have it again next year and to add some features to it to make it even more accessible. So those were all things we were happy that we're able to include. We also included this year the Border City EMS group to have on-site EMS. Previously The Culture and Recreation Department, all of our staff have first aid and CPR training, and previously we had some of our staff providing any support, but a suggestion from Owen was to add that, and I think it was an excellent addition to the festival. It gives everybody, I think, a little bit better feeling when you have trained medical professionals there. Unfortunately, we did have a couple people who required that, including my father-in-law, and I was glad that that service was available, and we'll continue to have that every year as well. It just, I think, brings a lot more a comfort to everyone knowing that we have trained professionals there in case someone requires any assistance. And finally, the last thing, just from a accessibility, mobility, transportation standpoint, again, we partnered with Bike Windsor Essex and Transit Windsor for free bicycle valet and shuttle service, and in total, we had 300 cyclists and close to 700 riders for transit. So those were good implementations to make to, try to provide the best access we can. And we'll certainly continue to look at how we can make the festival as accessible as possible to everyone. And, look forward to receiving any more suggestions, because that's the only way we can make improvements, if people provide us suggestions on things that we should look to implement. I don't know if you have anything else.
Sorry, I just had one item to add. I just wanted to make the committee aware that I was made aware of one accessibility issue at the duration of the festival, and that's the only one to my knowledge. And that issue was that one of the carnival rides was placed on the grass on our curb. So there was an individual in a wheelchair whose family was able to get close to the ride, but the individual in the wheelchair had to remain in the parking lot. So we are aware of that, and we're working with our carnival company to get a ramp for next year.
Great, thank you so much for the great feedback. Is there any questions or comments from the committee members? Okay.
Motion to receive.
Okay, seeing none, so the recommendation is that the manager of Culture and Recreation, dated August 15th, regarding the 2023 Strawberry Festival post-event update be received. Councillor Burns and Jason. Okay, thank you, that has passed. Okay, item number 5, upcoming meeting date. The recommendation is that the Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting scheduled for September 26, 2023 be rescheduled to October 25th, 2023. And
Move the recommendation.
okay, so Councillor Burns, and I will just say Michael. Okay, thank you. Okay, and then we are at E. Item E, questions and statements from members of the committee. Nothing up there, I can't see. Okay, so seeing none. Next meeting date is scheduled for October 25th, 2023 at 3:30 p.m. And we hope to see everybody there. And this is where we will adjourn. So thank you everybody for attending today, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.